Making Monsters with Taylor Dahl. It's like beer and brats, a perfect combination.
You know the deal.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. We're continuing on this off-season podcast series, for the ninth pick and beyond, because I am addressing what the Bears may do with that ninth pick, but there's a possibility they could trade back to maybe 11, 12, 13 people are talking about. They also obviously have some later picks that some of these guys may end up falling to the Bears too. So today I am joined by Seth Engle. He's a Penn State Football Editor for Daily Collegian. So Seth, thanks so much for hopping on with me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So obviously people saying this, we talk Penn State, so everybody knows we're here to talk about some Nittany Lions, which there's a lot of guys we could go when we're talking about Penn State right now, but I think the main one I want to start with is, and you correct me because I heard this name pronounced two different ways. I've been saying Olu Fashanu, but is that wrong?
I wouldn't say it's wrong. I mean, from what I believe over the past couple of years, I think we've been calling him Fashanu.
Fashanu, okay.
That has changed up over time. So
okay. Yeah.
Pick one. I don't think he'll be offended.
Okay. Yeah, that's sometimes that happens where you'll say a certain name for years and then it gets to the draft and all of a sudden it's different and you're like, okay, well, we'll figure that out. So Fashanu is how you've been saying it the last couple of years. Let's go ahead and start with the start for him. His sophomore season in 2021, he appeared in 9 games, making 1 start that year. The Ball State game is something that I see a lot of people kind of point to, where you kind of really started to see some of his potential and what he could be. 3 different rushers that game, had 60-plus yards. He helped lead Sean Clifford to 230 yards and a touchdown in that game also. But were there moments even at that time early on where Penn State was already kind of feeling he could be a fundamental piece of that offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, he came in and he was a low-rated 3-star. Not many people knew too much about him. And that 2021 season, Penn State had a ton of struggles on the offensive line, and people didn't really know his name yet. Obviously comes in at Ball State, and you're just starting to, maybe see what he's capable of, getting some good minutes against pretty small schools. And that postseason, the Outback Bowl came around, and that's actually when he got his first start. And that's when you really started to hear, this guy Olu, he could quite possibly be not just a starter next season, but also, maybe a star on that offensive line. And we just completely saw that really shape up that off season and as soon as fall of 2022 start. That's when Olu Fashanu truly became as we know him today, basically.
Yeah, when you go back to that 2022 season, he received a ton of honors that year. Walter Camp, second team, third team All-American by Phil Steele. What was it this season that you guys really started to see improve the most to lock him in and really make him even more noticeable?
Yeah, I mean, 2022, you talk about the accolades, but he probably could have been a first-round pick if he declared for the draft last year.
Wow.
But for whatever reason, he decided to stay another year. We know he had injury concerns in 2022. He actually missed the final 5 games of the year with an injury. But he had really solidified himself as, this highly capable offensive lineman. At that point, he still hadn't, really allowed a sack in his career. Very few pressures. He was just, one of the best offensive linemen in the country.
Yeah.
And that only continued into this year. Luckily for him, was able to play a full 13 games, which we didn't get to see in 2022 because of the knee injury. And now, after all that, it's unfortunate because he's had some injuries in the pre-draft process, but still one of the best offensive linemen on the board. Mm-hmm. It's only a matter of where he actually lands.
Yeah, you're talking about that 2022 season. He started 8 games, left tackle, allowed 0 sacks and 281 pass blocking snaps during that time. When he did, when the injury unfortunately happened and he did miss the rest of that season, how much did it affect? Did you guys notice immediately the offensive line and how much they were missing when he was gone?
It was definitely it was an interesting story because he was replaced by this true freshman at left tackle. So obviously the left tackle position is huge on the offensive line. It's really the anchor. Mm-hmm. when you have a true freshman come in there, there's going to be a big shift. But it was a big storyline with the team that year, was how they were kind of able to maintain their success on the offensive line, despite a number of injuries outside of Olu, which really speaks to, Phil Troutline, who's the offensive line coach at Penn State, and what he's been able to kind of accomplish here. And Olu is absolutely, in the fold and in the picture of this Penn State offensive line room, which has really developed, over the past 3 years, over Fashanu's career. And he's kind of stood out as the standard for, what an offensive lineman could potentially become here.
Yeah. Do you think that the reason he did not enter the draft after last season was because of that injury?
I think it definitely could play a part, where he maybe wanted to show scouts and teams, hey, I'm able to play a full 13 games, and do it consistently, which he did do this year. Another thing I think was also getting his college degree, which he actually got a semester early, so he got it last semester, which also speaks to this is a smart kid. This is a supply chain major. He's not coming in here and just doing an easy major and trying to get by. Like, supply chain is hard. It's a really competitive program at Penn State, and he was able to graduate early with it.
Wow.
So he's a bookworm, and you can kind of see some of those smarts on the field, and also when you talk to him in interviews.
I love that, and that's what I give so much credit to these guys who, number one, are getting degrees after putting also the amount of time we know that they have to put in to college football. And you feel like football in general, especially right now when they are heading from college football into the NFL, when these guys say they're entering the NFL and they are going through the draft process, it's almost nonstop from college, from the way they play now a little, into this later in the season. And then with all the offseason that goes on between Senior Bowl and between Combine and Pro Days and then the draft, and then pretty much camp starts right after. So these guys go through a lot during that time. So when I give so much credit to them for being able to get those degrees at the same time, and for him even early, that's amazing. I love hearing that type of stuff. So when we talk a little bit about last season, he started you said 13 games last season at left tackle, allowing 0 sacks and 365 pass blocking snaps. How beneficial was this for the offense at Penn State in general? And Drew Allar, there's multiple times last season where I talked about him, and in certain games he had high 70% and 80% completion percentage in some of the games, multiple games with 3-4 touchdowns. How beneficial was it to have that offensive line, but Olu being a part of it?
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line was great this year, especially for a program that, has kind of lacked real consistency, at that position. And, like you mentioned, I mean, Olu being there every single game has definitely played a part. And I could give you the number right now. It's 1,349 career offensive snaps that he had over 3 seasons, and he did not allow a sack in any of them.
Wow.
I mean, there were some struggles here and there. You look back at the Ohio State game with JT Tuimoloau. That was a hard game for him. That was a game that he really struggled and, maybe showed some signs of weakness that we had never seen before. But that's a great, defensive line. And I think throughout the season, for the most part, he was as consistent as can be, especially when you have a first-year starter like you mentioned in Drew Allar. But, yeah, I mean, this is kind of just his abilities have kind of showcased to the rest of that unit, like, this is what you can be. And, he's a consensus All-American. Really can't rack up as many accolades as he did, or more so. He really did it all, and I thought he was pretty good this year.
Yeah, that's incredible, especially when you're talking to Bears fans who just watched Justin Fields get sacked almost 100 times in 2 seasons. And so there's definitely, and I think and that's the biggest question right now is where Ryan Poles, I think, sees the offensive line, because they did draft Braxton Jones just a couple seasons ago. A lot of people believe that he's improved enough to kind of hold that left tackle spot, but other people are saying you can't miss out on a guy like Olu if you know you're protecting your quarterback. Now probably will be Caleb Williams, but when you look at situations like that, you definitely want to keep your quarterback upright, and that's important, and it's something we haven't seen in Chicago. Do you see him as true left tackle will be left tackle in the NFL? Do you see some versatility there, or do you think that'll be the position he will play at the next level?
But I do see, some versatility just because of the way the Penn State system is kind of set up. He hasn't taken right tackle spot snaps in quite a while. But, I'm sure that freshman year, because that's kind of how they were able to, get people to step up after, they had some players injured was by preparing them to play, every spot on the offensive line. He's a hard worker, and I don't think he'd have trouble transitioning if need be. With that being said, though, I really do think his future is at left tackle just because that's where he shined. But, with the Bears specifically, you mentioned Caleb Williams and building around him. Olu went to high school with Caleb.
Wow.
So they have a great relationship. Yeah. So Olu's already blocked for him before. They text back and forth. It's funny. They've talked kind of throughout this pre-draft process. So, that's something to kind of look for. And,
Definitely.
If Caleb Williams can maybe put a bug in Ryan Pohl's ear and say, well, this is my old high school teammate, we have a good relationship, that's definitely something, maybe a direction that I think they could go in.
That is very interesting. And it's funny, too, Seth, because when I was looking at Olu's profile on the Penn State page, and I was like, Gonzaga, it's like Gonzaga something high school. I was like, why does that look so familiar? Yeah. Now it makes sense because I've been looking at a whole lot of Caleb Williams too. So that's very interesting and definitely something because, they're already, like I said, they're definitely wanting to put the best possible surroundings around Caleb. They don't want another quarterback to kind of have to go through all of the chaos that Justin Fields had to go through. So definitely interesting there. I want to switch over to the other side of the ball, another name that pretty high and I think has even risen on a lot of people's draft boards, and that's Chop Robinson. It's a name we've been talking about for a while when it comes to in college football, and Penn State's defense obviously was really fun last year. They had a lot of pieces of that worked really well together. But even at the start of his career at Maryland, you could already see potential for Chop. He did a ton of things there. They had him dropping back into coverage at certain times and doing kind of a little bit of everything. But he did take his game up a notch when he transferred to Penn State, and I think that was obviously the idea for him in the beginning. But tell us a little bit about that start for Chop at Penn State.
Yeah, you talk about him, at Maryland, dropping into coverage, being real versatile. I think that's really important to note because I think that's been the thing with Chop, this kind of pre-draft process is, he shined at defensive end, but this guy is totally capable at outside linebacker. That's what he played in high school. That's what he was recruited as. It wasn't until he got to Penn State that he really started to transition into just a primary pass rusher. But he's able to do it all. And you look at his body and, 6'3", he's just around 250. This is a guy who's, he's a linebacker build who can also, get on the defensive line, maybe play maybe similar to a Micah Parsons role where it's a little of both, but maybe more so on that D line. He's a very exciting prospect. He's quick. He's fast. He's really got all the intangibles of a defensive line. I'd say the only question with some people is, maybe his arms, maybe his reach is a little small. But I think that he's kind of twitchy enough where he has no problem getting into the backfield on a consistent basis. And he's just an electric player and really someone that I think a lot of people like to play with.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see Chop, whether it's on the Bears or somewhere else, hopefully not anywhere else in the NFC North. But why do you think was James Franklin a big part of why he kind of went full on pass rush, or was it something that Chop wanted to do? Do you know?
I think his body kind of just transitioned into it. And
Okay.
Penn State's got a little similar situation right now with a guy named Abdul Carter, who was a linebacker now transitioning to defensive end. I also just, I think it kind of fit the system that their defensive coordinator now at Duke, Manny Diaz, was running at the time. But it worked out. They had a pretty loaded linebacker room, and there were some questions about, defensive end when Chop was first coming in. Those questions have completely gone away. Penn State's really got a great defensive end room now, and I think Chop was kind of the standard there.
Yeah, we talk about some of these, the other edge rushers that a lot of people have towards the top of their boards, and Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, two of the main ones, Latu. Those guys are names that you see at the very top that have been talked about the most, but I do think that Chop's name deserves to be in a lot of those conversations. And you just mentioned, I think, some of the reasons why, just the all of the things he can do in addition to just being absolutely disruptive when it comes to being able to add to that pass rush. But if you were to name just, let's say, 2-3 of his biggest strengths that you believe would make it and transfer to that next level the best, what would those be?
I think first things first is got to be his speed.
Okay.
And we saw that at the combine, absolutely, with, his 40-yard dash was the fastest among all, defensive linemen. So for him to kind of come out there and run from what was, I think like a 4.48 or something, pretty ridiculous, and that just goes to show, you question this guy's size on the line, he's still going to blow by you. He finds a way. And I think that's always going to be, his best trade is just his athleticism and quickness. And then, I think other than that, I think his mentality is, this is a locked-in guy who, when you talk to, he just has fun playing football. He enjoys being out there. And I think you mentioned this, at the start, but, this was a fun Penn State defense this year. And a lot of that was because of Chop Robinson and just the energy that he kind of brought to that core. And really just brought everyone together. So, he's the full package in my mind. It's interesting to see where he might end up. For the Bears, probably going to have to trade back in the first.
Yeah.
Or get lucky in the second. But, I don't see him falling past the first round.
Yeah, me either. And that's why it's an interesting situation for the Bears because we kind of go back and forth. It's mainly wide receiver, edge, and interior offensive line are the three positions, the three biggest needs and the ones we talk about. So some people, obviously we talk a lot about a guy like Rome Odunze, and if he's sitting there at 9, go ahead and take him. And some people like Jared Verse or Dallas Turner there, but there's also some options to where you can, accumulate some more draft picks and get one of these guys who you do feel like could still make a big impact on your team pretty much right away. When you look at just this last season, 26 tackles, 19 solo, 10 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 2 pass breakups, 3 quarterback hurries, fumble recovery, forced fumble. He was just all over the field. And that's the kind of guy that you really like to see on a football team. And we mentioned it a lot during this podcast already in the 17 minutes of how versatile and how much he can do on the football field. One of the things that I will say, Seth, that I like a lot about somebody like a Jared Verse is his ability to not only rush the passer, but he can set the edge too. And that's one thing that I really like to see in one of the guys, especially I feel like it fits really well what Eberflus likes to do defensively and his athleticism, all of those traits kind of fit to it. Is that something that you would see, a type of defense that you would see Chop fitting into also?
Oh, absolutely. And that just goes back to the versatility thing.
Yeah.
It's like this guy can do it all. I'm interested to see how he's able to do stopping the run, especially in the NFL. It's just a completely different game.
Yeah.
But that Penn State edge, that I guess that whole defensive line, the whole year was just locked up. The whole entire season, it was arguably the best defensive line in college football this past year. And Chop Robinson was, he was probably the best player on that line. So, Penn State was great at stopping the run. Teams didn't really pass on them either. So, I think it would be a great transition into the NFL. And, the Bears have an interesting core, especially, they have a nice little young core at linebacker. And it'd be fun to see him, line up, opposite Montez Sweat. So I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like that would be very fun to watch. And I think that's what most people, most Bears fans love. They look at a weapon and giving Caleb Williams another weapon, but it's hard to not imagine what the defense could be with the secondary they have of, with Jalen Johnson and Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon and all of these guys where they've really been able to ramp that up. And then like you just said, with Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, they have the potential to be a really good defense, and you put someone across from Montez Sweat and it could be scary. But another name I want to touch on, just a couple before I let you go, because another edge that was on Penn State that you actually had 7.5 sacks, and I feel like people haven't talked about him a ton. But is it Adisa? Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
Adisa Isaac. Yeah, so he's a name that I've seen kind of floating around a little bit later, a little further down into the draft, but he's highly regarded in a lot of the things he's able to do. Like I said, he had 37 tackles, 16 for loss, 7.5 sacks. Tell us just a little a little bit about him, and did he feed off a lot of what Chop was doing, or was he kind of his own person too?
Oh, Adisa Isaac was unbelievable this year, and his story is just incredible. Where a couple of years ago, he had a pretty bad Achilles injury that ended his 2021 season before it began. He was supposed to start that year, and everyone's kind of wondering as he gets into 2022, like, how's he going to be? Is he going to be able to play a whole year? 2 years have gone by since then, and this guy has been one of the most consistent defensive ends in the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
I'm honestly not sure, why this guy is not a clear-cut, high second-round pick, low first even. I think he has the potential to be a really, really good player in the NFL. He's a bit longer than Chop. He's at 6'4", 6'5". His length is great, exactly what you want in a defensive end. And he just produces. It wasn't really. I think Chop and him kind of fed off each other.
Yeah.
But I think Adisa Isaac, completely. He made work for himself this year, and he did really well. And it's just been cool to kind of see him work past that injury, and now potentially be a relatively high pick in the NFL draft. And the Bears do have success drafting Penn State guys. You mentioned Jaquan Brisker.
Yeah.
Adisa Isaac was on defenses with Jaquan. I don't think Chop was there quite yet when Jaquan was there, but there's a certain mentality that a lot of these guys kind of hold for themselves, and I definitely think Adisa Isaac hits that.
I love Jaquan Brisker, by the way. He's become one of my favorite Bears this last couple seasons. The energy he brings on the football field, the way, and it's almost him and Jalen Johnson have kind of just taken over that secondary room and become like such leaders there. And with Eddie Jackson gone, Brisker is pretty much our leading, our guy there in that safety room. And he's been so much fun to watch him progress. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. And I was curious about that because when anything I've seen of Isaac, it's all been just absolutely phenomenal. And another guy that you're just like, man, I feel like he could make that impact. And like you said, he for some reason sits a little lower. So I personally think somebody is going to get an absolute steal with drafting him, especially with where they may be able to end up getting him. Just a few names, because we talked about that Penn State defense and just how fun they were to watch. And a part of that, I think, is just the corner position in general. The corner, not something I think the Bears will be looking at in this draft, but I just wanted to talk about some of those because you guys have like 5 or 6 that are going into this NFL draft. Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, Daquan Hardy. Tell us a little bit about those corners and how much they were able to impact the secondary at Penn State.
Yeah, I can just give you a quick rundown on each of them. 3 guys, which is a lot. It's all 3 Penn State starting corners. Kalen King, I think, is the biggest name. He was a projected first-round pick, I think, at the start of the season. He was an All-American last year. And just did not really produce to that level this year. Some of that was also due to the fact that he wasn't being targeted as much because people, saw what he was capable of. We're going to say, okay, we're not throwing to this guy anymore. So he dipped off a little bit, and when it came to the combine as well, he just really did not produce and show that athleticism and lockdown defense that we had seen in 2021 and 2022. With that being said, I think he has a chip on his shoulder, and I think he is capable and able to perform at the NFL if he's in the right system. The other guy, Johnny Dixon, he was the other starter at corner. He was a transfer who came in and really found his footing in 2022 and just took off. This past year he was, exceptional. When Kalen King wasn't being targeted, Johnny Dixon was really holding it down. He actually opted out of the bowl game, as did Kalen. And then was injured in the Senior Bowl, which basically ended his pre-draft process. And the last guy you mentioned was Daquan Hardy. Played nickel corner for 5 years at Penn State. He's trying to move to the outside, and I'm interested to see what he's able to do. I think he can also play some safety if he wants. Okay. But with these new kickoff rules, I think Daquan could have a huge impact on special teams. He became the first player in Penn State program history to return not 1 but 2 punt returns in a single game this year. So I think he's definitely a weapon on special teams that is now looking even more lucrative. So I think Daquan Hardy will also be an impact player.
That honestly, Seth, you bring up a really good point there because we've talked about it a lot when that rule change first came out And Bears fans were looking at it almost because obviously Devin Hester getting into the Hall of Fame this year and kind of talking about the end of an era of what once was the way that kickoffs and even punt returns happen. And then now how that's shifting. And I love it because they want to make it more exciting. They want scoring. They want big things to happen. But it really will be interesting this next few years how teams start to draft and maybe focus even a little more on special teams than they had recently, because you want to find guys like this who can take advantage of the way it's set up now. So it'll be really fun.
Right. Yeah, I think it'll be cool to see.
Yeah. So, again, I really appreciate it, Seth. A lot of good stuff here. We now know Olu and Caleb know each other from high school, so that's an interesting thing. And a lot of good stuff. I know Chop's somebody that I really, truly think, like I said, whoever gets him is getting an absolute monster. And I really appreciate you hopping on with me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Taylor.
All right. Have a good one.
Yep. You as well. Take care.